The other day, a long time ago, a couple of years back, I had to collect my son from school. He's 2 years old. Got to his school, put him in the car, put him into his little car seat, and off we went. And as we were driving, my son asked me a question. Now, he said it in his own little broken language that, only parents can understand. And he said to me, "Wark me." So I said, "David, that's a great idea. When we get home, my boy, we are going to go for a walk. That sounds great." He then said to me again, "Wark me." And I said, "Yes, my boy. When we get to the house, we'll go outside and we'll have a wonderful walk." Of which he then repeated, "Wark me." And I said, "My boy, I've heard you. We'll go for a walk when we get home." Of which he upped his level a little bit. "Wark me." "My boy, we are in the car. We cannot walk right now when we get home." "Wark me, Daddy." "My boy, when we get home, you're not going to walk. You're going to stay inside." "Wark me, Dada. Wark me. Rock me. Rock me." He wasn't asking for a walk. He was asking for a song called "Rock Me." And I had exploded at this 2-year-old. Now, was this interaction that I had with my son just merely a misunderstanding? Or was I operating from something else? Was it the misunderstanding, but plus it was the long drive that I had to go do to pick him up? Was it the work that I knew at home was waiting for me that upped my levels of frustration? Was it maybe difficulties with my wife or family or whatever it was that was raising those frustrations so that when my 2-year-old is speaking in his little broken language, I let the anger rise? Now, I hope this wasn't deeply scarring for my child. I hope he's not going to sit there one day and go, "This is a defining moment in my life." But I'm sure we can all relate. I'm sure we can relate to that time in our lives where with an interaction with someone else, we're not merely operating just from that time frame, but we're operating with a whole lot of other stuff coming from us. We're operating from what I'm going to call the elephant in the home. What is that elephant? That elephant is wounds and pain and brokenness from our past and even from now that I operate in that then has an impact on the now. That elephant in the home that we don't want to talk about. That elephant in the home that we sometimes don't even see. That elephant in the home that is unsaid because of the pain it brings me. Wounds that I've received, whether it was from interactions with other broken people, or from this broken world, or most likely, most of the time, just from my own brokenness. And the problem with these wounds is that these wounds don't just stay with us. These wounds have impact on others as we operate from them. These wounds go from one person to another. And I believe each one of us this morning have a need, a desire to be truly healed. That we no longer operate in these wounds because we know that these wounds from our past and wounds from the future will have impact on others. And so we don't want to do that. We want to be healed. We want to be people who operate in the light. a place of freedom, a place that when we are dealing with family issues, we deal with them right then and there. From that moment in time, we are not pulling tons of baggage from the past into that moment to create even more frustration and pain. We want to speak from a place where we can breathe, where there's freedom, not a place where there's pain and hurt. We want to be in the light. And to get there, we need to take a couple of steps. And so this morning, we're going to look at the first step that we're going to take. Just the first step. And to do that, we're going to look at two things. We're going to look at darkness, and we're going to look at light. And I'd like to invite you this morning as we go into the darkness, I'd like to invite you into my darkness, my pain, my wounds. I'd like you to see how my behaviors have had impact on my life, and also how the wounds have created more pain in my life. And so let's go into that darkness. And what is that darkness? What is this elephant in the home for me? You see, the problem for me is my wounds have marred that image of God that I truly am. Those wounds have caused brokenness in my identity, caused me pain. They've told me things about myself that are not true. See, my wounds, some of them are, David, you're not good enough. And in fact, David, you're not as good as others. David, you don't truly deserve love. And in fact, you can't even give love. David, you crave intimacy with others, but you don't understand what intimacy is. So can you ever truly give it? These wounds feed me, and what happens with those wounds is that I then move to behaviors of darkness rather than behaviors of light. And so come with me into our passage this morning in Ephesians chapter 5. In Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 7, we're going to get a peek into this darkness and light. Let me read it for you. Ephesians 5 and verse 7. Therefore, do not become partners with them, for at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. I'm going to stop there for the moment. And I want you to see the picture here that Paul is trying to show us, because Paul uses a beautiful illustration. First, he uses the illustration for the old life, the life before you were a believer. He uses a term for it. And then he uses a term for the new life, the term for you as a believer. The term that he uses for the old person, darkness. You were in darkness. And I want you to catch what he says here. Not just that darkness is around you, but darkness was in you. And then, for the new life, the believer, it says light. You are light. Walk as children of light is the picture. Beautiful contrast. But here is my problem. My problem is a person who is a person of light still moves towards the darkness. Because my problem is, even though I am saved, I'm not yet fully saved, and that this flesh no longer is a weight upon me. One day I will be, but not yet. I am still in process. And we call that process sanctification, the idea of moving to become more like Christ. I am still in that process. But the problem for me is, while I'm in this process, although I should be operating from who I am as Christ has made me, I often operate from my wounds and my pain. And what happens, those wounds draw me towards darkness. And that darkness is behaviors that I commit. And so then what do I do as a person of a light? Instead of asking why those behaviors are happening, what do? I just try and fix the behaviors on the outskirts. Hide those. Stop those. Because if I stop those and hide those, then I'll be seen as a person of light. But I never truly get to the wounds. And as I never truly get to the wounds, those wounds just rear their heads again and cause more pain in my life and then others. And so this morning, as you follow me in my darkness, as you have a look into it, I'm going to go back into the passage and show you some of the places of my darkness. Go with me back in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 4. Verse 4 of Ephesians 5, it says this: "Let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place." This one's a little bit painful, in that I have operated in that place. Crude joking, filthy talk, filthy language. And when we hear that language, I sometimes think of that video that you may have seen that has just come out. But similar things like this. I don't know if you've seen it. There's a little girl in the back of her dad's car, and they're driving off. And the dad's filming, and the dad's playing a song. He's listening to the song, and then he realizes that a really bad line is coming up. So being quick as a flash, what does he do? He takes the mute button, turns it down. Everything's safe. Except what he hears is his little daughter in the back say every word of that line. Pitch perfect. In tune. She knows the words to say. And the dad's left with shock and horror. But here's the thing. That little girl and me, we don't use crude language or speak filthy things because it's just something we've heard. Because that can be stopped. But the reason we use it is it comes from a wound. And my wound is this. As I was growing up, people used this language. And the idea was, if you want to be with us, you speak like us. If you want to be loved by me, you talk like me. And as a person who didn't want to be the outcast, the person who wanted to be with these people, what did I do? I spoke like them. And then Christ comes and saves me. And I come into the light. But that wound is still there. That wound of, if I want to be like you, I speak like you. So then what happens? When I'm with my church friends, I speak of the mysteries of God. Oh, what a wonder He is. Beautiful on Sunday. And then in the week, when I was with my soccer friends, I spoke the most disgusting things. And I didn't do it because I thought it was cool. I did it because I wanted to be liked. I couldn't handle being an outcast because I want to be enough. I want to be enough for you. I want you to like me. And so I speak like you. But then here comes the problem. As I speak like them and that enters my heart, then out of the abundance of my heart, when I'm driving on the road and people are driving terribly and my son is in the back, when someone cuts me off or does something terrible, do I operate in, oh, Lord, forgive them. They do not know what they do. Or am I operating in something else? And then what happens? My son sees that. And then when my son's watching me and he sees me speak to church people and then speak to others, and I speak differently, what does he learn? I need to speak differently in order to be light. And that wound that was in me goes from me and is transferred over to my son to create even more wounds. And I really wish that's where it ended for me. Just here. But once again, as we look into my darkness, let us go back into the passage. In verse 3 and verse 5, it uses the term covetousness. And in verse 5, it says, or who is covetous, that is an idolater. It's the picture here that Paul is saying, is that if you desire an object or someone so much, it then becomes idolatry because you put that above God. And once again, I've operated in that area. And yes, I've been covetous of many things in my life. But the one that often comes to me is I desire other people's accolades. I desire other people's encouragement. And I think, why do they get it and not me? I want that. I deserve that. Or if you're not speaking to me like that, does that mean I'm not enough? And so it's not just that I desire it, but it's coming from some wound in me. And my wound is this, is that I am not enough. I need to be something else. I need to look like you in order to get that. My identity is not enough. And so what then happens is that I then start to act like that other person. And as I get accolades from them, I act more like them. No longer operating as who I am, but as them. And what inevitably happens is that takes time. That takes effort. And that means less time for home. And so as I create this elephant, this wound in myself of trying to be like others, what then happens for my son? As he sees dad out and not at home, he then starts to think, maybe I'm not enough. And that wound is then transferred over once again. And my son sits there and he thinks he is not enough. Because all I've ever tried to sort out is the behavior and not the wound. And once again, I wish that is where it ended for me. But once again, in this passage, for me, I see my darkness. Once again, turn to the passage. And we're going to see this again in verse 3 and in verse 5. Verse 5, it says, "For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure." Sexually immoral or impure. And I know some of us may say, in the church, surely there's no sexual impurity in the church. As I stand here right now, I can tell you in my life, there has been sexual impurity, and thus there has been in the church. In fact, throughout most of my life, I have been in churches where I've been preaching the Word of God and then gone home and delved into pornography, into that darkness, into that shame. And once again, I think, well, I just need to stop that, and I never analyze the wound. I never analyze why I delve into the deep, dark crevices of the internet. I never look at why. I just think I need to stop it, because if people know, shame, pain. But if I were to truly analyze why I do this, it's once again, I crave love. I crave people to be intimate with me. And maybe possibly in my past, I never got enough hugs. And as much as that sounds ridiculous, that could be part of it. But then also, as I look at the world and what the world told me, I started to define intimacy with sex. And I thought those two are the exact same. Unless you're having sex, you can't have intimacy. Throw that person into the church, where in some churches, sex is seen as bad, first off. But secondly, you go, well, how do I operate with this intimacy? And so what then I do? I go to something that's easy, something that never turns me down, something that comes with welcoming arms. And I turn to pornography. And what then happens? I define that's how intimacy works. So then you bring that into your marriage. And you go, well, when I get married, everything's going to be fine. We'll have sex all the time. But there's another person in that marriage. And the problem for them is they don't define intimacy as only sex, but I do. And so then that means when sex is being withheld from me, oh, you're withholding. You're causing me pain. But the problem is my view of intimacy is all sex. And so I can never give this person what they need. And the other thing is, I'm adding huge expectations onto the weight of another person. Massive things that they will never be able to reach, all because I'm operating from my wound. And so once again, we see this transfer of baggage and pain. We see how this pain moves across, not only for my wife, who now has to deal with this idea that her husband doesn't seek intimacy in different ways, but even for my kids. Because if I define sex as the only way of intimacy, that means I give no one else intimacy. Because obviously I'm not allowed to, I shouldn't. And so if my kid comes for my hug, I don't truly give my whole self to that, because that's not intimacy. So then what happens for my family? Their wounds grow. They don't get enough hugs. They don't get enough other forms of quality time. And wounds are developed in them. And all because I never truly asked in the beginning, why? Why is there darkness? Why do I do these behaviors? What I've done is taken these wounds and transferred them over, and then expected a 7-year-old with his own wounds and own pain to now deal with my stuff as well. And he never could. The elephant in our homes, the elephant in my home is my wounds, my brokenness. And if we do not deal with it, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and then finds ways out, whether through anger or frustration or pride or selfishness. It finds its ways out and causes more wounds because I haven't dealt with it. And because this elephant is so dark, I'm ashamed and I hide it in the corner thinking no one's going to see it. And yet it finds a way out. How can I ever truly discipline my child properly if I'm always operating from a place of wounds and not a place where they need it, a place of truth? How can I truly love my wife, truly love my parents, truly love my friends if I'm not dealing with the wounds? Because in any little thing that they do, I can misunderstand and seek it as pain, and then go to what is easy again. Your wounds may not look like my wounds. Your darkness may be different, but it's there and needs to be dealt with. And Christ gives us a way. He doesn't leave us hanging. He gives us a way. As much as there is darkness, there is light. And so what I'd like us to do is to take that step in the light this morning. Follow me into the passage once again as we look at light. We've already read verse 7 and 8 of Ephesians chapter 5, so I'm going to go from verse 9. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true, and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. So as Paul starts this, he goes, you know what's right. You know what's light. You know what is good. And in fact, he even pushes it further. Discern what is good. This is where you should be living. And as he speaks to it a little bit more in verse 11, he speaks about the idea, expose them. Expose that light. Expose that darkness into the light. And the way he's speaking here from Ephesians is that as brothers and sisters in Christ within the church, we are to do that for another. I'm supposed to go to Buddy and go, I need to expose this darkness in your life. And so I'm going to ask us to do something today. And it's not, because I think we all get scared of this, I'm not now going to go, okay, let's do your darkness now. Here it is. But I'd like us to take a step of faith. I would like each of us personally to start walking in the idea of exposing our darkness to light, personally, bringing that out to others. And these two places that we can do that as a start, as that first step. The first place that we can go do that is through community. When we came into light, we came into the church. We came into the body of Christ. And he wants us to work together. But I know it sounds hard because you will think, if I bring this out, people will think I'm disgusting. They'll think I'm despicable. They won't want to be around me. But let me say from personal experience, that is not the case. In small groups of trust, community groups, gospel groups, when I've brought out pain and darkness, I haven't been met with judgment. I remember the first time I shared with a group that I struggled with pornography, thinking that I was the only one there. Everyone else is the good Christian. Here's Dave, the bad guy, about to be kicked out. And instead, I had people raise their hand and go, me too. I struggle with that same darkness. And for those who didn't, they didn't judge, but rather, how can we help? How can we heal? Do we keep you accountable? And even further, they would then ask, why? Why are you struggling with this? So I'd encourage all of us, be involved in a gospel community group as a place where you can expose your darkness to light. And if you're in one, maybe this week you take that first small step. I'm not asking for the deepest, darkest, but just a small step in exposing something to light. Maybe you're the catalyst in your group. The second place we can do it is through counseling. And whoa, did I just raise that word, counseling? I know what some of you are thinking. That's for the crazies. That's for the really broken people. I ain't there yet. You may even look around and go, that person, not me. But I'd like us to do a little exercise today as we think about darkness, as we think about our wounds, and think about those things. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is I want you to turn to someone who's next to you, maybe a loved one, maybe it's a complete stranger. Turn to them. And what I want you to say to them when I say so, say, "You're not okay." Do it now. Okay. I'm seeing enthusiasm. I'm seeing conviction. And that's always the easier part, especially amongst husbands and wives. They turn to each other, "You're not okay." I know it. And the reason we can also say that is we think, we go, well, in this world we're broken, we're all broken. So of course you're not okay. But now I'm going to ask you to take a little bit of a harder step. In a few minutes, when I get there, I want you to say to each other, the same person, say, "I'm not okay." And as you think about it, I really want you to truly think about it. Think about what that elephant in the room is for you, the elephant in your home, the elephant that sits in your heart. What is that brokenness? Don't just merely think about the behavior, but think, why am I doing that? And start to realize that you are not okay. And as your first step, you're not going to turn to someone and say, "I'm not okay." And I'm not just asking the people who've been a Christian for a month. I'm speaking to elders. I'm speaking to pastoral staff. I'm speaking to everyone. So what I want you to do now is turn to that same person and say to them, "I'm not okay." Do that now. Not as much enthusiasm, but it's that recognition and realization that I am not okay. And so I hope you now all realize you need counseling. When you spoke about the crazies, you're one of them. We are the broken people. We are not okay. We need help. And I need to sit with someone who is wise, who's going to take me and help me with that first step and ask me to expose my darkness to light. And then go, why are you struggling with that? And then to give me the next steps in that walk so that I can walk truly in the light. Counseling is not for the weak. Those who don't seek counseling are the weak because they do not recognize they need help. Counseling is for the person who knows themselves and needs help. So go seek counseling. And here's the beauty. This is the beautiful part. As we expose this stuff to the light, as I share with my brothers and sisters in Christ, which is really difficult, as I bring it up, note what happens. Go with me back to the end of the passage there. Verse 14. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. As this is written, it's written from the perspective of the non-believer to believer. So the non-believer is the person who is dead in their sin. They're in darkness. And as it uses that passage there, they are in death. And then the beauty is that Jesus comes and wakes them up. Arise, O sleeper. And then rises them from the death and then brings them into the light. And here's the beauty. Christ shines upon them. And so for us, we were in darkness. We were despicable. God could not even look upon our sin of how bad it was, but then sent his son. And his son didn't leave us there, but his son then picks us up out of that darkness and that mud and that grime of sin and brings us into the light and shines upon us with all his love, all his mercy. And as you look upon your darkness, he goes, look at light. Look at what I've brought you out of. Now let me heal it. And he can and will heal it. And part of the way he does that is through the body of Christ, the church. As we expose it to the light with others, he draws his whole body around us to care for us, and then he cares for us as well. And I want you to think about what it would look like in your homes, whether it's with kids, wives, husbands, or whether it's with friends or parents, whatever it is. What would your home look like if that elephant grew smaller? If that wound became less visible because it was healed? What would it look like in your home? How would you operate? As your kid does that terrible thing, and as you discipline them, instead of disciplining them from wounds and snapping at them and going, fix that behavior, you now discipline them with truth, with the idea that I need to draw you out from darkness and into light, where you can feel Christ shine upon you. My boy, I don't just want to fix your behavior. I want to fix the wounds that have been placed there on your heart from others, from myself, and from you. I want you to come into the light. And as that child or parent or friend, as they sit in that light and they realize their identity, when they go out into this broken world and darkness comes upon them, they no longer go, I am not enough, but they then go, no, I know who I am. Let us operate in the light. And as the band comes down and prepares to sing about that light, I want you to see this picture. Imagine as you share with someone, whoever it is, counselor or community group. Imagine as you share that baggage, that weight, those wounds. Imagine what happens in your life. Because I can tell you this, when I've shared my pain and my struggles with others, my wounds, those wounds start to be healed and are no longer part of me. And as they are healed, and I can remember so many times this has happened to me and happened to others, I feel lighter. I feel I can operate in a far greater way because I'm healed and no longer carrying an elephant on my shoulders, but rather walking towards the light and then watching my family follow me as we walk as children of the light. Let us sing.